Hey guys, Dave Lolonic, Sticky RX here, working on my personal 1998 355 F1 GTS. Needs a new clutch. This is going to be one video of a series, and this is rebuilding the Voith Flywheel. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. Here, getting ready to put together the Voith Flywheel assembly for my 355. So I've got the parts here. I'll be going through this in detail, but I just have some parts and tools laid out here. So I want to bring to everyone's attention the fasteners here that actually hold the flywheel in. These appear to be Torx. Well, they're not. And then you think, okay, well, they're Torx Plus. Well, guess what? They're not. This is a special fastener out of Germany. It's called RIBE. I don't know if you'll be able to see if I zoom in here. RIBE. And it takes a special bit. This is a RIBE rib bit. It's an R8. So the bits are readily available. The fasteners are not. I tried like crazy to get these things. You cannot get them. So I'm going to end up reusing these, which isn't a big deal. I kind of boogered up one a little bit, but only on the face. So I've got, all the parts here, the springs and everything. Everything's been cleaned off. I did number these, and they're numbered inside the Voith. Number 1 here, so number 2 going clockwise. Same thing here, I got number 1. So I've got the pieces numbered. Everything has all been cleaned up. What I'm doing right now, one of the last cleanups, is I am chasing the threads of these bolts. There's thread locker that's used, which I'll be using as well, because these go into aluminum plates and you really can't torque them too much. So there's a lot of thread locker on these, so I'm using a die and shaving and cutting off the old thread locker to install new. So I'm getting all the prep work done here, and I'll be back at you real soon, and we're going to go ahead and put this together. I've got some fasteners here that I'll explain, some just assembly fasteners. These are temporary. And what I'm going to do first, I don't know if I'm going to video it, but I'm going to dry fit this without pressing bearings. I'm going to put it all together dry, just so I've got a handle on how it goes, and make sure I have my tools to torque this, because once I do the grease, I don't want to stop. I want to get this thing all put together, okay? I'll be back at you. Okay guys, I'm going to do a little dry fit here of the assembly first. Now, the one thing I did in error when I took this apart is I should have been very diligent about marking orientation of all the parts. Now, I did mark inside here on this plate and the lower plate and the upper plate, but I didn't mark them in relationship to the outside housing. However, those can only go on one of two ways. It's either this way or 180 degrees. Now, the other thing is I've just started to loosely put some springs in here. Again, I want to dry fit this. I've got some long temporary fasteners here, some socket head cap screws, and they're a good length for me to just kind of start getting the assembly together. And then I'm going to put in the actual hardware, but I'm going to be thread locking it in, because you've got aluminum plates here that the fasteners go into, and if you torque on aluminum, you can rip the threads out. So I'm gonna hand tighten that stuff pretty tight, but I'm gonna be using Loctite blue thread locker. The red, you have to basically use heat to remove, so this should be a pretty sufficient unit. So now, in doing some of the dry fitting, and I'm not going to go through it all with you guys here in the camera, but I am going to dry fit everything together. When you put the, this plate will go in, of course, with the O-ring. I'm going to leave that off for now. I want to bring up one other point. When you put the flywheel in, and I did document this, there is some orientation you have to consider. So when you put it in, essentially what you want, I want to make sure the camera can see this, is you want to have these two holes in the housing match up with the large slot, if you will. So you got two holes matching up with this, and then you've got a hole between each notch, and then again another two at the large. Because if you turn this by one bolt hole, for example, and it's not doweled or anything, if you turn that, what you have is the notches or these pieces here cover up those holes. And I did document that part of it ahead of time, and that's not what you want. You definitely want it to be what you see here, long notch, 2 holes, notch, notch. So that's how you want to orientate this. I just wanted to bring that up in the video, and I'll dry fit this and then we'll do a video of it going back together complete. Okay guys, we're going to get started putting together the Voith flywheel assembly here. So the first thing I've got is these little plugs that go on the back. These are the original crush washers. Now, you generally shouldn't reuse these, but what I did is I stoned both sides and took out any depression and got them in real nice shape. So I'm going to reuse those. And this is a thin piece of, sheet metal. So I am going to put a little thread lock on it as well. I have these little micro brushes, so I'll apply a little bit on here. And these I'm just going to hand tighten them. I'm not going to torque them, again, with the sheet metal. And we've got the crush washers for the seal, so that shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so I made it pretty tight. The other one here. What I'm doing is putting the really sanded side down, and the other side is very flat too. It's also been sanded. That's going to go against the fastener. Okay, so those are locked in nicely. Now we can turn this over. What I've got here is some hardware just out of our shop cabinet, and I'm going to use this hardware as some temporary guides. So I'll just place this in like so. Now I might have to take this out when I press the bearing. I gotta just get a feel for this. I dry fit this, but I didn't do bearing pressing, so I gotta see how that's gonna work out. Okay. And now what I've got here is this is a brand new Hill Engineering flywheel. You can't buy this from Ferrari, you gotta buy the whole Voith assembly, and it's no longer available, so Hill Engineer reproduces these. So the first thing we gotta do is install a bearing. And what I'll do is I'll take a little LPS2, just a little lubricant. And I just wanna make the press fit, go a little smoother. So I'm just putting a real little bit in here. And I've got the bearing here, and I don't know the degree of press. I guess I could have measured the parts, but it's probably a higher press on the inner race than outer. So I'm gonna just try to tap this in for right now. I've got presses here I can use if I need it. Okay, so I did use the arbor press to push this bearing in. Very light press, just better than tapping. So you've got this retaining clip that needs to go in the flywheel. Now I should mention, this bearing, it doesn't matter which way you put it in, the seals are the same, but the bearing that goes on the other side, it's got 2 different seals. This is a very special bearing, and I talked to NTN about this. And they think it's because there's less friction on one seal. So it's important that the brown seal face out, the black seal go in. That's how it came out. We'll put it in the same way. Obviously that's a brand new bearing, so is this one here. Okay, so we got the retaining clip in. Now we'll turn this over. What I've got is a couple of socket head cap screws here. You'll see where I'm going to use these later, so I'll just thread these in. Flywheel off to the side. Okay, so now we're ready to start putting the pieces together here. So these are the original plates from the Voith system. What I've done is I've stoned these, any high spots, took off any burrs, so they're in real good shape. So I'm going to start by putting this plate in. Now there's really one way you can put it in, well, two ways, 180 degrees from each other. Okay, at this point, I got to break out the grease and start greasing this. Now this lower plate doesn't move, so I'm not worried about having grease under it, but I'm going to put grease in the cavities. So I need to prepare for that. Stay tuned. Okay, so I have the Kubler grease here. This came from Superformance in the UK. They buy a large quantity and then they pack it into these smaller 195 gram tubes. So I'm just going to apply a little bit here on the bottom surface. Okay, I'm going to spread a little of that around in the cavity. Again, this first plate doesn't move, so it's kind of like the retainer for the shoes and whatnot. So I'm not worried about any getting underneath that plate. There's no point. It's not going to move in relationship to the outer housing. Okay, so I've got some in the cavity. I'm going to end up putting a little bit more in there, spreading it around. Now guys, this is the first time I'm doing this, so this is a little bit of a trial and hopefully not an error. Pretty mechanically inclined, so I think I'll pull it off okay, but when I go to press this flywheel, and it's going to be a little interesting, especially with my temporary tools here. Okay, so now I'll take the next plate and put this in, and I've got it marked the way I've taken it out with a number 1 and such. Let's get this figured out here. And again, you could put this stuff in technically one way or 180 degrees, but I've got everything pretty laid out so everything goes in correctly the way I've taken it out. Okay, so now that we've got these two plates in, actually I'm going to pick this plate up and I'm going to put some grease on the top of this plate because these two plates are going to move and I want to have that greased. So let me do that first. Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit more on. I just want to make sure there's a nice grease film between the plates. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and apply the grease on the back side of this plate as well. So really thick, high viscosity grease doesn't really run, it spreads really nice. I'm going to put some on the outer diameter here. Now this plate in relationship only moves like a little bit within the spring centering, so it's not like it revolves. Okay, so now we got the two plates in. What I'm going to do now is take these little spacers, and again, these don't move. I am going to put a little grease around the outside of them though, because the plate might contact them, I'm unsure. And now I'm putting those over the temporary alignment fasteners I have, which I'm hoping are going to work out. We're going to see. I think it'll work out fine. Again, I dry fit some of this stuff to get a test run, but I didn't do the bearing pressing in the dry fit. I didn't want to have to use a puller and pull it apart. Part of the other reason I'm greasing these is when I pull out the alignment pins, or the alignment fasteners I should call them, to put in the real fasteners, the little bit of grease here should hold these in place nicely. It's a nice little tool to use grease to hold stuff in position. Okay, let me get the camera here and just get a little close up. All right, so that's what we've got thus far. Okay, now I'm going to start with the first spring and shoe. What I think I'm going to do is put some grease in the cavity first and then put the parts in. Okay, so I put, I don't know, about a half a golf ball size of grease in the cavity, and I'll just roll that around within the cavity a little bit to get the bottom really coated. You know, it's going to get all kind of packed with grease thereafter anyway. So now I'm going to take the 2 shoes and spring and put that in the first cavity. Now what I'm seeing already is with those 2 plates able to shift, and there's a pocket, well, there's cutouts in the lower plate, cutouts in the middle plate. You want to make sure that they're keyed properly and that the shoes push all the way down into both. So now I'm going to coat the shoe. Now I notice these shoes are very loose on here, so there's really a lot of grease bound barrier, if you will, around them. So I just put that in there, and my suspicion is that under the centrifugal force, these springs might actually crown a little bit, might, you know, arc. I don't know that for sure, I'm speculating. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and put the other 3 in with the same procedure before I load everything up with grease. So again, that's about a 1/2 or 3/4 of a golf ball full of grease in there, and I'll coat the bottom of it, get that whole cavity coated really nice. I'll grab the camera and show you guys like how I did this here, just so you get a feel for how that cavity is coated. Okay, so you can see I just, you know, put a good amount right in the bottom there. Sorry that the video work isn't the best. I'm doing this all by myself here. Okay, so I'll take number 2. Again, I'm making sure I've got it seated and, you know, that the plates aren't cued. Now, the fact that I have 1 in there now, that's orientated both of them in relationship to each other, so I'm in pretty good shape. Okay, go for number 3, fill the cavity. I'm actually going to leave the tube kind of right in here now. I probably used a little bit more in this cavity, and I think I'll do that in the 4th as well. Okay, yeah, I used more in the 3rd and 4th cavity, and that's better. It's kind of really creating a nice grease pocket in there. Okay, so now I have all 4 shoes and springs and cavities filled in, if you will. We've got the last plate to put on, but now I'm gonna fill the voids with these cavities with this grease. And then I'll also put some on the plate and things of that nature. So what I'm gonna do is, so that I spread this as equally as possible, is I'm gonna squeeze a little pile onto each one and kind of go around. so that I just get a pretty good idea that I'm spreading this on as equal as possible. Okay, so you can see I put 4 dabs on the center of each. Now I'm going to go around. I'll probably put a dab on each end. Okay, there's still a fair amount left. I would say that there's 1/3 to 40% left in the tube. I'm going to work these piles in now into the spring shoe arrangement just to get a feel of what I've got. Yeah, I can see already from the first one that it's going to need more. And that little center shoe on the spring, I'm going to center it about the grease the best I can. Again, I imagine some of the motion and the force holds this stuff in the proper position. Okay, now I'm going to give it some more. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just go around and put a little on each so that I make sure I try to even this out the best I can. Okay, now I'm going to work that back in. Now I'm going to do, with my fingers being greased up and everything, is I'm going to just get this plate greased as well. Now, I just did make a little mistake. I got a little where the threaded holes are going to be, and I don't want that, so I'm going to wipe that out real quick. I don't want to have any where the threads are going to go, and I've got a Q-tip here. I can clean that out. So I'm putting some on each side of the spacers, if you will, and on top of the plate. And then I'll add more on top of the springs. And I'm also putting some on the wall where the O-ring that goes around this plate's gonna go down on, so that it'll slide real nice on there. So that's the straight machined wall that you'll see on the inside of the housing. So I'm gonna make sure that has a light coat of grease all around the 360-degree diameter. It doesn't need much, just a light little coating. Okay, so I have the plate fully coated. I have it coated next to the spacers, really everywhere. So what I'm gonna do with all the remaining grease is get it packed into the springs and the shoe assembly. And again, I'm going around all four, trying to put the same amount of grease all the way around, and I'll keep doing that a little bit at a time so that I try to evenly distribute this as much as possible. I suppose if you really wanted to get crazy, you could weigh it out and divide it by 4 and have it separated by weight per each spring cavity. What I'm going to do too is I'm going to put a little bit in the top of what's going to be the cavity here. So when I close this up, it's in there. Kind of fun squeezing the tube when your hands are all slippery. Okay, so you see I put everything in that cavity there. Now this plate doesn't rotate either, but this middle plate will rotate about it. So I'm also gonna cover this plate with some grease. I gotta get a little bit more here. Again, I want to stay away from the threaded holes. Almost out of grease. It's going to be hard to get it all out of this tube, but I'll do my best. Okay, so I'm coating this whole plate here, just keeping away from the threaded holes. I don't want to add grease inside those holes. I'm going to have thread lock in there. I want to keep those clean and dry. Okay, I got just a little bit more grease in here. I want to get out everything I can. I'd say I just about got it all. Okay, that's it. So that's what we've got. Next step, we'll put the O-ring on that plate and marry those two up. Here, and I'm going to install the O-ring on this plate. Now this is the original O-ring. It's in perfect condition, and it's a static O-ring, meaning it doesn't rotate. It's fixed. It's just a static, like well, even a piston moves, but this is a static O-ring. So I'm going to put this back on. There we go. And I don't have any grease in the threaded holes, but I've got a little bit here, so I'll set this down a second. And I'm just gonna get any grease out of these threads. Really only got it in like 2 holes, but I'll clean it up. So I got some cotton swabs here. Spray a little isopropyl alcohol on them and get any of that grease out of the threads. One more. That's it. So now I'm going to put this on. I've got a number 1 written on here to put it back where my number 1 position is for orientation. Now remember, I already greased the inside of the bore, so I'm not going to add grease here. So now, this is where, and I'm going to take these gloves off at this point. This is where the temporary pins are going to come in handy. Just going to wipe any grease I have here. So now I'm going to start screwing these in to draw that plate down. Now these temporary screws are full thread. So sometimes screws are only threaded a portion of the way, but these are going to let me pull the whole assembly together. By the way, these are M6 by 1 socket head cap screws. So I want to use the screws to suck the plate in with that O-ring. Let's see if this is the right. So I'm going to go around and just get them all roughly tight. Okay, so now they're all just snug. So I can try to push a little bit, push and also tighten and just pull this plate in real nice. And I'm gonna swing around, like go 180, 180, almost like you would do with your tightening up lug nuts. Okay, so I ran all these temporary screws and I sucked down the plate, so that's done. Well, now these screws are a little too tall. I want to put the flywheel in next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over, and one at a time I'm going to change them. Now I'm not putting in the final hardware yet, and I'll explain why later. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a theory on this, so I'm going to do this for now. So I'm just going to swap these longer temporary screws with some shorter ones. So I think you guys realize this, but these temporary screws are not only holding it together, they're holding the spacers so that they don't come out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back off these screws so that they're just like hand tight, and it allows that plate to float a little bit. Okay, so now flip it back over. And what you can see here is there's some grease in, you know, the area where the pilot goes for the flywheel. So I'm gonna wipe that out because, you know, unless I scribed the line earlier, I wouldn't have known how much area to go. So I'm gonna just get that out of there. Okay, and once again, I'll get any out of the threads. Okay, so now we're ready to put the flywheel into the Voith assembly and press the bearing. So this is something, again, I have not done yet, and I want to get this squared away just right. So I'm going to put a little of that grease, I'm going to take it from the side, and I'm going to put it around the press diameter just to help get this baby pressed in there real nice. Now I could use assembly lube or the LPS tube, but there's no point in risking contamination. I'll just use the Kubler grease here. Again, just to make that press go a little easier. Okay, so now when I press this in, I'll be able to rotate it, so orientation doesn't matter yet. I need to orientate it when I line it up for the holes, and I kind of explained that in the other video, but I'll still use these right here to kind of get this started. Okay, I'm back. So I just used the arbor press. Again, I have a hydraulic press here and an arbor press. I like to use the arbor where I can because I can feel things, and got this pressed in real nice. So now there's another retaining ring that has to go in. So guys, don't make a mistake and press this bearing into the front of the flywheel first, because you can't get the retaining ring on that goes on the snout of the Voith, holding basically the Voith and rear flywheel bearing together. Okay, so I have the proper external retaining ring pliers, proper size. And that clip is on. Okay, so now bearings pressed, got this on here correctly. Now we need to put in the fasteners for the flywheel to the Voith assembly. Now I explained in the other video that you've got to orientate this correctly. So here we go. This is the proper way. So what you want is this large slot in the flywheel to span 2 holes, and then these singles to span 1 hole. If you're a hole off, you're going to be covering the holes with those. So I should have done a better job documenting that when I took it apart, but I did verify that. I have photos of it. Now, the reason I have these in, you'll see it's going to be to react the torque. Okay, so I don't have any grease in those holes. I've already checked. Here are the original fasteners. These are nowhere to be found. They're made by RIBE, Ribby, I don't know how to pronounce it, German company. You could find the bits all day long. This is the bit, but you cannot find the fastener. Now, these are not Torx, they're not Torx Plus. It's a special rib socket. I boogered one of these up because I slipped at first. I used Torx Plus to get them off, and I actually, after I screwed up the one a little, I used a mallet and I tapped it in, one of these little mallets, and got it real tight. But you can see this goes in here real easy, so you have to have the proper tool. So what I'm gonna do here is apply some thread lock. And I did find a torque spec for this type of hardware in aluminum. I'm gonna get these all started and then we'll torque them and I'll give you guys the spec. So I'm putting a generous amount of thread locker on. And I'm just gonna take these down to not even snug. I'm gonna do this kind of quick too because I don't want this thread locker setting up until I torque, but this cures on the absence of air and the presence of... Okay, I'll get the torque wrench set up, I'll be right back. Okay guys, so now we're gonna torque the rib fasteners, they're M8s. They're gonna get torqued to 25 Newton meters. That's a spec for aluminum that I found, steel fastener on aluminum. So what I've got here is just a piece of pipe. I'm gonna use this with these 2 screws just to react the torque while I do this. Now I should have my little marker here to dot when I do it, so I'll just use a Sharpie, but a yellow marker would be better. There you go, 25 Newton meters. So I'll just put a marker right there and go on to the next. Again, 25 Newton meters, steel fastener going into aluminum. Okay, so now what I need to do is, we've got this assembled here. I'm gonna flip this over, and now I need to address these fasteners. So what I'm gonna do is take one out at a time, clean the hole, put in the factory fastener, and I'm gonna do 2 things with this. I'm gonna apply thread lock to the end, but I'm also gonna apply some Honda bond to underneath the head because these have to seal here and there was sealant on here prior. So I'm gonna get set up with that and I'll be right back at you. Okay, so I'm gonna take one of these fasteners on a time and install the factory fastener. Remember, these were holding that spacer from sliding around. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean in that hole because I know I had a little bit of grease on the temporary fasteners. So I wanna go in there and clean that threaded hole out. Okay, just before I put any thread lock in. So what I'll do now, well, I guess I'm gonna take a little bit of this Honda bond and get that right around where the head of the fastener is to seal that. Again, as I mentioned, when I pulled this apart, there was sealant underneath the heads. It'd be better if it was an O-ring or a crush washer, but that's what they did. So I'm just putting a little bead around there, and then I'll take the thread locker. And again, these are going in aluminum, so that's the reason for the thread locker, well, one of the reasons. And also the torque for an M6 fastener in aluminum is 11 Newton meters. So I've got the torque wrench already set for that. So I'm going to take these to torque right away. Okay, and you see the sealer oozed out right underneath the head very nicely there. Okay, so I have all of these M6s with thread lock and sealer around the heads. And they're all to torque, 11 Newton meters. So this Voith is almost done. I've got the pilot bearing to install. Once again, you want the brown seal facing outward and the black seal going. So I'll just use a little bit of LPS2 here and just put a little bit of oil on that inside diameter and a little bit on this outside race. I'll take this over to the press, I'll get that pressed in. Okay guys, at the arbor press, and I didn't have a press tool the right size, but I happen to have this this seal for a a pressure bleeder, so it happens to be the right size, so I'll use that to press the bearing and the pilot bearing. Okay, turns out I could have used a flat plate. The bearing race sits proud of the flywheel. It doesn't recess in, so a flat plate would have worked. And that's all set, so the Voith assembly is all complete here. Now I need to put in the friction, the clutch disc, and the pressure plate on here, and of course, install this Voith assembly into the pumpkin. That'll be next.